Okay, so good morning, everybody. Today we have Professor Mitra from the University of Edinburgh. We share something in common because we both are ICT engineers. Well, I used to be. I converted to social science. And Professor Mitra contacted me a few months ago because he was interested in our work and especially on the concept of techno-optimism. So we share this idea that technology is uncritically framed in a very optimistic way. Basically, the general idea is that we can fix all our problems with technology. We don't believe so. And it's very nice to me that people working in the engineering department at a very high level, as you do, have this kind of critical thinking of technology, critical perspective. So today I was going to introduce his work that is probably not his main core research, but is slowly becoming the center of his research. And it's about the connection between ICT innovation and the notion in general of technology in the context of digital technology and ICT and colonialism, no? On how ICT also has the power not only to improve our lives, but also to dominate and to oppress other people, right? So the floor is yours. Normally we always have 40 minutes of presentation plus half an hour of discussion. Of course, I will not be pushy, so you can take 5 minutes more. And yeah, so okay, please.
Thanks, Mario. Thanks for the very nice introduction. I'll struggle within 40 minutes, but I'll try as much as I can. So thanks for having me here. I will start the presentation. So a big part of my work of this other job that I'm doing now is about decolonization of technology, which I am going to, that's a part of work that I will start with, and then we'll go into the techno-optimism or techno-solutionism point that Mario pointed out. But I'll try to go to the initial part a bit fast because I think this audience knows quite a lot about those, but probably there are things unknown. So I am, just to give a brief introduction of myself, I'm not a historian, I'm not a social scientist, I'm not a scholar of decolonization in theory, but I try to dabble into all of these a little bit. I think a part of, no, you can see that.
Press X.
Sorry?
If you press X, maybe.
But can I press that?
No, it's us.
Oh, okay.
I think it's
Do it.
I don't understand. Responsibility. Only because people connected can see. Yeah.
But can you see that?
No.
No.
Okay, great. Okay. So I'm basically I'd say a scientist and engineer in some way. I've trained in physics and electronics and neuroscience. I've been in industry for long. I talk to a lot of STS scholars and other people. But what I realized is a huge body of literature that has already been done in STS. I'm not saying anything new, probably. I have never come to technologies themselves who need to know that. Otherwise, we are missing a big part. So that's a bridge I'm trying to create. This is the University of Edinburgh in a nice clean day, which is not very likely, but you're all welcome to come and say it's a very old and historic university built out of a lot of colonial money, I'm sure. But that's how it is. But I don't work in this nice office. It's somewhere else. So this is also the other aspect of my life, which is I'm not going to talk about at all here. This is what I do, or my students do every day. A lot of medical and neural electronics.
What's neural electronics?
When you interface with the nervous system and for electronics for neuroscience. Neuroscience requires a lot of electronics.
Yeah, there are machines that talks to your brain, basically.
Up to animal brain, at least that's what we do. We don't develop devices for humans because that requires a huge lot of regulatory approvals. So those are the devices on the top right that work into animal brain designed by me and my students. Yeah, many of these and capsules that go inside your gut to measure the gut wall. But
Sorry.
Yeah, I can talk about that, but it will distract the rest of the talk. Let's keep it for a little later. Yeah. Okay, great. So since I bring up decolonization, I should say decolonization has a long history done by people other than me in a completely different context. It is a word that has changed over time, and people like Tathan Young has already kind of warned us that decolonization is not a metaphor. It's not a metaphor for all the other things that you want to do. But the word has changed over time, and we take it as a word that we understand it today. And that would involve something different from what Tathan Young originally proposed. My working definition is that to decenter scientific knowledge from a Eurocentric perspective, understand how colonialism shaped historical, scientific, and technological development, and confront new colonialism sustained by innovation in applied science and technology. This is what I go by in a very loose manner. But I wrote a paper recently on need of or decolonization in engineering and technology. So that's the paper I mentioned here, and can go and read it. It's probably will include a lot of the things I'm going to talk about in the beginning of the talk. So why is talking about technology at all important in a decolonial context? That's the first thing I'm going to try to convince all of you. And because I guess a lot of you already know that, but maybe not in terms of numbers and statistics, because those are important for me as a engineer, but I understand that's not always the right thing to do. But almost every aspect of our lives are touched by technology, and actually a certain kind of technology. And technocrats are probably the most leading figures in terms of policy making in public sectors and everywhere. So this is a data that I show that the world only ever had 6 companies which reached 1 trillion in market share, $1 trillion in market share. This is enormous. There are very few companies that have ever reached $1 trillion. And all of them are technology companies. And not only technology companies, ICT companies. So ICT is huge, information communication technology. And I add to that electronics as well, information communication, electronic technology. So you know these names, Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet. There's only one other one you might not realize, Aramco, that's a Saudi, basically venture fund, and they fund mostly technology companies. So
what's in the end? Sorry, I can't see.
NVIDIA, that's one you don't know probably much, but that is becoming one of the key dominant figures in the world now. So of course their market shares go up and down. What I show is when they all at some point in their time went above $1 trillion. And $1 trillion is enormous. Another way of looking at it, let's say the R&D that goes into all of the world. And if you compare a single year, what Amazon, Alphabet, Huawei, Microsoft, they can spend, and all of Horizon 2020 can spend. This is all of Horizon 2020, not just technology, everything put together. There's that at the bottom. Yeah, and UK, DARPA, NSF, all are there. But that is what Amazon could spend every year, year after year. Wow. And of course, it doesn't include the when they buy other companies. They can buy companies, and that's not their R&D, and they always buy other smaller companies. So that tells you, I mean, sets the narrative of who can talk about what technology is in the future. Yeah, that's why the electronic or ICT technologies are very important to discuss about. So that's how I set the stage here. Because I was giving the talk in India once, and there's a MST, what they can spend in 1 year.
Hey, quick question. What Amazon does with this R&D is just software.
So Amazon creates a lot of robots, and a lot of the Amazon Web Service is its biggest money-making thing. It's a server. Amazon has the biggest server in the world. So anyone who is doing any business on the internet probably uses Amazon. Even if it's the greenest of all company, they probably still have Amazon Web Server, because AWS is that company which we don't hear about. It's much bigger than Amazon's other retail business. So they continuously need lots and lots of chips to create this enormous server that's everywhere. And of course, their retail business use a lot of robotics and a lot of factories, supply chain management, and so on. Yeah. So what you see as the Amazon website is not Amazon's key R&D. That just happens anyway. They don't need to do R&D on that. So all the other R&D is at the back of this.
This is yearly or like?
Yearly. This is yearly. Of course, it changes. I mean, I've taken 2022 data. Yeah. This was not like this before. 10 years ago, it was pharmaceutical companies who was at the top, and over the last few years, it has changed significantly. Yeah. Okay, just say ICT. I include electronics in ICT because the material of all of ICT is electronics, and I'm going to try to convince you all about that later. But this is the part I'll probably go a bit faster. You know about all of it. The colonial world was massive. There's only few European countries that colonize the rest of the world. It's all here, and all the green bit is what was colonized by those few countries. What you call global south is something like this, also not a huge thing for all of you. Here we restrict since I'll go back and forth between decolonization and technology, I have to set up this stage. So I'm going to talk mostly about settler colonialism of Western Europe, not other historical colonies. There are historical colonies like what Russia does now and before, what it did before, what Han China has done to the rest of China, what Indian elites have done to the rest of India. So all of those colonizations are still happening, and it's still happened in the past. So decolonization is the opposite of previous European colonialism, in which there are multiple definitions. This is a more social science definition of it. Again, a bit of history, modern colonization. What I'm going to talk about, or what I'm talking here about, is started at 1500. It's almost annihilated all of Native American population in certain places. And you probably know about all of those. 12 million Africans were brought from Americas, and 6 to 8 million died before arriving. So an average lifespan was less than 7 years. So it tells you the brutality of what it is. The Industrial Revolution, even after colonization officially ended, took a lot of resources out from all parts of the world. And the triangular trade is all what made colonization possible. This data and more data, which is none of these are unknown. And eventually the scramble of Africa shows, we started in 1914, how this 6 countries or 7 countries here just divided Africa in whatever way they wanted. So that's the last part of the colonization that we are still being affected by. But what do we mean by decolonization in science and technology? So what I try to say is the history of techno-scientific advance is Eurocentric. It's not only a false information, it's a dangerous narrative. And that's the narrative I'm going to try to push back against. European universities had a big part to play in this, and not only to create the narrative, but also legitimized European knowledge and colonization. All disciplines, humanities and economics and medicine, are trying to push back against it, but there is very little work in science and technologies, particularly technologies. And history of
Previous one.
which one?
What work is less done?
In science and technology, decolonization aspect. It's very rarely done in science.
Agree, sorry.
There are very few decolonial. If you go to a science department anywhere in the world, almost no one will talk about decolonization. There will be science and technology studies who are in humanities doing that, but not in science departments and engineering departments. That's what it is.
Okay.
But you are right. I mean, of course, there are other people doing it. The history of modern science and technology must be understood in the colonial context, as someone said, work I cite here. Again, these are not at all unknown. This is a very standard view of history of science and technology. There was pre-classical period, there's classical period, medieval dark ages, then scientific revolution came with some names all of us know, and the big modern science. After that, sometimes you'll very rarely hear about small names here and there, but not as a historical, important historical figures. Just to remind you all, this is for an audience who doesn't know much of this. I'm going through this very fast here. But it was, again, Needham paradox that was brought into the question why modern science had not developed in civilization X, but in Europe. And maybe other people also asked that, but this is also Eurocentric information that Needham was the first person who asked this. Well, maybe not, not him. Maybe other people did ask him. Who knows? We don't know that information. Why did Western science suddenly find itself around 1500 and catapult it to the top? That was another Needham's question. Again, yeah, there is a deeply ingrained idea that Western science uniquely brought about modernity. Sorry. So to capture, it captures all undergraduate, not only undergraduate imagination, but also public knowledge as well. So this is what some people are trying to push back against. A very simple diagram of all the major people that you have heard of in Western scientific knowledge tradition and so on, and the time when they started their work and when it all became known in the Western world. But a lot of things were happening in the world before that. And of course, I'm just citing just a very few of those. And it was happening all over the world. What happened in around the time when Western science came to be known as what we now know is exactly around 1500 when Europe invades and discovers what you call Americas and South Asia. Two other things happened around the same time was quite major, fall of Granada, the last Islamic empire in Europe, that kind of created the incentive for Columbus to go out and do things because he got the money for that after people were waiting until the last, because there was a lot of money that went into this kind of wars inside. So Columbus was actually just waiting for the war, fall of Granada to happen. And also dissociated. So knowledge always had this tradition of going from one place to another. No one thought this is Christian knowledge and that is Islamic knowledge and so on. But around the fall of Granada, kind of there was a separation. So people tried to make this difference because that's old knowledge. We don't want to touch that. And a lot of books were burned, huge amount of books were burned just to create this difference. But I'm not a historian, so people can push back on these ideas, but what I get is what I read from a secondary knowledge of history. Also, what happened was the enclosure movement within, so that's what is known as internal colonization, enclosure movement in a lot of European countries, particularly in UK and Germany, and Peasants' War and Reformation. So that what happened in that time is the creation of local elites. And that is what I go back many times, that unless you have a significant body of local elites, science or technology doesn't get created because you don't have the leisure and the resources to do that. And the leisure and the resources happen only when these internal elites form in the Western world. So little bit more of those history. Again, the same thing I talked about before 1492, the Pope decided, okay, we'll break the world. Treaty of Tordesillas happened in 1494. So this is the boundary of the west of the world. So anyone on this side, Portuguese can do all the business, all the Spanish people can do business on this side. That's how the world was divided. Of course, there were people in this part of the world all the time, and they were doing their own things. And just yesterday, I was talking to Mario about all of capitalism started with primitive accumulation. As Adam Smith pointed out, he never said where the primitive accumulation came from. Right? We know it came from colonization. Where else can it come from? The rest of the world was not in dark ages, of course, we know very well. And there is a very huge amount of history about that. And that is rarely being taught anywhere in our Western scientific tradition, maybe historical tradition, it is sometimes taught, not in scientific tradition. I'm giving you these examples, and these are examples that I'm not reading out particularly because each of them will take some time to explain. But they are all interesting and important on its own right. What I'm going to show one small picture here is when in 1485, the first time any European ship crossed the equator. That's here, yeah, the first time a European ship crossed the equator. So Europe is known for, or European empires is known for their seagoing adventurous nature. But by that time, the Chinese ship led by Zheng He made the trip showing red 7 times with a ship that is 4 times larger than what Columbus' ship was. So there are lots of people going all over the world doing lots of stuff that is nowhere comparable to the achievements of what happened in European civilization around that time. Of course, South Asian merchants were going around all over South Asia, and there are even bigger Pacific islanders covered, which cannot be even shown in this map, covered all of the Pacific Ocean by their seafaring knowledge. So the most important knowledge tradition that was suggested in early European history that the explorers or the voyagers made the world known to us or to Europe, that is entirely false because a lot of people were doing it all the time. But what about Western scientific genius people actually? So let's consider Newton, who is always comes up. Never, we cannot talk without anything about this without Newton. So Newton had access to early knowledge of various sources. Was an elite, of course, had very good education, but not at all an autodidactic genius, because he got his data from all of this colonial endeavors. So the ships going all around doing transatlantic slavery, giving the data for tides, and he had to send people with pendulums all around the world. So, and those things happened because there were transatlantic slavery happening. Okay, and there were people who were working with him, whose names we don't know, who actually local people, a lot of them, who got data for him. So empire and applied sciences were deeply intertwined. Like Newton, Boyle, they were major shareholders in English East India Company. Like even if you say Newton had other people competing with him, Leibniz and so on, they were all somehow connected to empire. So most of the success of European natural history, from Sloan, Darwin, Humboldt, or whoever you call it, can talk about, came from contacts made through empire and employing indigenous people all throughout. Not many of these lives have been looked with a decolonial lens. I think that is a key issue I'm trying to highlight, because history of science and history of colonization, they don't often come together. They are trying to come together, but it's not very common. So very few times will you ever hear about impact of Einstein's research look through a colonial lens. If you just search Einstein and colonial, it never comes up. So that's not a thing that people ever considered. But Einstein was an important figure in Germany, but he became even more important figure when he had 2 major discoveries of solar eclipse done in those 2 places. Yeah, with those 2 red arrows. So how do you think in 1914 someone in Germany got access to data from those 2 places? It's quite obvious, right? No one in Latin America could get data from, if there was a scientist in Latin America doing something, they wouldn't get data from Russia, right? They wouldn't get data from Australia. But Einstein managed to get data from these places. Without that, there wouldn't be such a major popular figure like that. Einstein would still have his own ways of doing things, but he wouldn't be as popular as we know now. So looking things with a decolonial lens is a way and is a practice that is not very common to science historians yet. But we know more obvious ones, like James Watt, who created steam engine, or one of the major part of steam engine, got all this funding from plantation owners, and was very much indebted to them. And he actually offered all of those to plantation owners and to for enslaved people. Same for to create the or to perpetuate the mechanism of plantation. Same for Carnot and Kelvin, who created the steamships and so on. But let's move faster. Telecommunication, you probably know, you've heard some of the names, Faraday, Kelvin, Maxwell. These are very important figures, but they were not doing things just because they wanted to do important science. These were major military endeavors for to restrict what the local people around the world can do. So these telegraph cables were laid to suppress local uprising. There was no other reason, because no one was looking for an internet of any kind. Textiles and dyes as well. It not only killed the local industry, first it's extracted from the local industry, the indigo farmers in India and so on, and it killed the local industry by creating artificial textiles and so on. So these are all part of technological advances of the Western world. I'm not going into the digital computer, what Babbage did and so on, because all of this can be seen from a decolonial lens, and that's what I'm trying to do. And again, one of the biggest achievements of Western technology was Suez Canal, and how Suez Canal came to begin and what it created is a history of its own. And the person who did Suez Canal, Ferdinand de Lesseps, he tried to build the Panama Canal. It was a major disaster. Both Suez Canal and Panama Canal killed in a huge number of indigenous people who worked for it with very small amount of money and almost in the conditions of slavery. Let me jump through this. So how did the site, I mean, what we know at the end is there is a scientific tradition that formed in the Western world, and it's primarily British scientific tradition in many cases, or here I'm going to talk about. And how did it form? And because you needed scientific institutions, and there is a big body of research showing what I'm talking about, the creation of elites or creation of a large, massive number of smaller or not, I would say, just individual isolated scientists, but this connection between these people happened because of the existence of calorific drink, which is very funny. I mean, calorific drinks are very important to keep you, your coffee is very important for your work, and that is the real thing. And that came from places. I mean, and it also happened that the calorific drink needed to be boiled. The water has to be boiled to create tea and sugar, tea and coffee. And that created this body of people who could come together with a great level of alertness. And this is not a funny side story. This is a major impact, how more and more people could manage to sit together and discuss things. And the coffee shop from London was one of the key ways of institutionalizing scientific knowledge. There was nothing like that before, where people just separately did things, but never came together to formalize knowledge. And the coffee shops in London were the first places where that happened. And that is the creation of first public sphere. First public sphere where knowledge got formalized, and that is also the root of enlightenment. And it can be connected to another work called another separate thing, why it happened more in the UK and in Netherlands is because of this idea of non-absolutist monarchy. So non-absolutist monarchy means people could just go out to the world, do what you want, and you're not people like people in the colonial world. The colonizers can go out and do what they want, and their governments will support them. Whereas Spanish and French tradition were more absolutist, where only the monarchs decided where you could go and where you cannot. So that's why Britain and Netherlands could create even larger, wider net of colonial world where they could probably create the local elites in a much larger form. And this also gave them a huge tax break, probably heard of the non-dom status that it's It's an important thing in UK now. Non-domicile status. Our prime minister has a non-domicile status, or his wife has, which is whatever you earn in other parts of the world. If you are a British person, you don't need to pay tax on that. You don't need to pay tax there. You don't need to pay tax in UK. And that is the reason why a huge number of, I would say, local elites went out and created their own farms. You don't see that many French and Spanish people created their own plantation, but that happened much more from UK, because UK government never asked for any tax from them. So those are other side stories of why the British minor elites became so important in how they get formed and how they were a major part in the tradition of knowledge creation. Okay, so this was, I hope, not too new and not too surprising for all of you. Is there anything you want to ask about this part? What?
Many questions, maybe at the end.
Very question. Okay. Okay, let's shift gear. What is happening now? Where are we now? I mean, this is some of these things are also quite well known to you, but I will also go a little faster at the beginning. So, of course, the present world is full of the implications of the colonial world, and one of those is what we have done with our emissions and what you are continually doing that. And this just shows the GDP rise and carbon emission going together. I think these kind of figures are quite well known. But what I try to connect to it is techno-scientific innovation is the primary force behind this economic growth. If you are not building new things, what would capitalism sell? That is one of the things that Mario and I were discussing. Probably you all have different ideas. The technological world continues to keep on creating new things, and that creation of new things is one of the major problems in how capitalism works. If there was no new things to be sold, probably it would be a different kind of capitalism. But I'm not sure how bad it could be. So innovation is necessary to make things more efficient, but to buy what and in whose expenses, of course, never questions. Innovation has also always become kind of indigenous practice. So some of us probably know this. Keynes wrote in 1930s that technological innovation and improvement in labor productivity would free people to work only 15 hours a week by 2030. Keynes is one of the founding figures of, say, the socialist part of economics. But nothing came to be true like that, right? 2030 is very close. We are working maybe 3 times more this number of hours. So. Again, known things to you, 3% GDP growth every year is quite normal in the Western world to expect, but growth needs energy, resource, and captured by constant technological innovation. Consumption in global north created enormous material footprint and ecological crisis, and the innovation and growth imperative creating new colonial structure. This is the thing that I'm going to emphasize more. The GDP and carbon emission, it's not only just a qualitative fact. People try to show the correlation by regression analysis, and it's so close that it's really scary. So R is 0.98, as you can see.
What is the source of this graph?
It's there in the slide. I'll probably give it to you.
Okay.
So it's a lot of things happen at the same time, like all throughout the world that we don't always connect. So like the deep sea cable is a very colonial structure. It connects all over the world. It connects world in the way that you wrote about it. There are very few exit points in Africa and South America. It crosses all of Africa and South America to connect people here and there, but there are very few exit points. So people in Africa and South America don't get access to these exit points. So, and there are around 3 billion people who have never been on the internet. Social media content moderation happens mostly in global south, because the social media that we see is not the social media, the raw social media. It is horrible, the raw social media. It's full of brutality, full of all sorts of things that you don't want to see. And people continuously moderate that, and almost nothing of that kind of moderation happens in the Western world. All of this happens in global south. And the you and some of these companies are not owned by any of Facebook or Google or anyone. They just outsource them, and there is absolutely no support when there are too many people committing suicide from this kind of war. They just close them and moves on to another company. So there's only one of this kind of company that started in Ireland, and they had to stop it because people just couldn't tolerate the amount of horrific things that the raw social media is. Yeah. You have to constantly monitor them, constantly content moderate them. Of course, global geoengineering projects are one new hype all around the world, but almost no actors from the global south in any of the global geoengineering projects. The clouds, data centers, video streaming, everything is basically materiality, a material consumed from somewhere in the world and outload and thrown away somewhere else in the world. And that's the part I'm going to talk more about. And finally, there is data colonialism. Where is data coming from? Whose data? Who gets access to that? But that's a major issue on its own. So I will leave that for some other talk. And here I come to my idea of techno solutionism. So techno solutionism is a concept that came out from this thing. Mario, you might need to press that cross. Mario, the top part is not. Because a certain kind of technology has become just too visible to us in the last 40 years. And that certain kind of technology is what I call ICT or ICT technology or digital technology or however you call it. We know what we got talking here because when we say technology or tech, it's more or less assume what it is. This is tech, but not a tractor is not called tech yet. And it's something we have to specify, or maybe biotechnology is not called tech. So there is a small, I mean, it's just a narrative today that all of technology is somehow considered to be digital technology. But of course, that's not true. This is a narrative that's common, and but it's not untrue either, because a huge lot of all forms of technology that happens this day requires ICT or digital technology or at the bottom microchips or things that I'll talk about later to drive them, to create them, to drive them, to monitor them, and for everything else in between. But this kind of technology touches a huge lot of planetary boundaries because it's so invisible what happens behind, and the planetary boundaries of all sorts are crossed by developing this technology. So, but techno-solutionism is this narrative that all forms of technology solves a problem can be solved by technology by creating more tech in the even if the problems came from technology in the first place. This is a utopic idea, and this idea is, of course, very prominent in left and liberal politicians as well, and even degrowth people, as I sometimes see. You probably have not read some of these books because I spend my time wasting my time reading this to understand what they are trying to talk about. Mark Anderson, who wrote this Techno-Optimist Manifesto, I don't know if you have read this. Have you? Okay.
No, I know them,
You know this.
all of them,
Yeah.
especially McPhee.
These are very important figures in Silicon Valley, and they have a huge amount of power. So it's not that, I mean, way more power than many head of states, I would say. Yeah. So what they say is important, even if everything is complete bullshit. It's probably important to read sometimes and understand what they say. So yeah, this is just an example. But none of this technology is benign, of course, and I'm going to talk about this ICT technology even more, and more particularly the material aspect of ICT technology. And these are all over because, as I mentioned, most of these are dependent on microchips. They are manufactured primarily in South Asia. There is a reason for that. I'll come to that later. It has enormous water demand. It exceeding need of critical mineral. And they go into electric vehicle all the time. They go into renewable energy sources, and they go into a single Tesla car will have 3,500 chips today. Yeah, I mean, that is probably, even I was not sure. I had to look up for that number. Yesterday, we were talking about how many chips are there in John Deere. I mean, probably 1,000 if a Tesla has 3,500 chips. Yeah, so all of these are together and combined in their impact. A conventional car has this amount of mineral in it. Electric vehicle has this amount of mineral in it. And this is what the amount of mineral that's there. The amount of mineral that was required to produce the 3,500 chips are not mentioned here because that's not there in the car. Because microchips is a tiny thing. It requires a lot of mineral to produce that tiny thing. You don't see the volume of a microchip doesn't say what was needed to produce it, and that's a problem sometimes. We have heard why solar panels and wind turbines and so on has reduced in cost significantly over many years, and mostly that happened in China. But what was only recently been found out that this was done primarily by Uyghur population in Shenzhen province. I forgot which province. Yeah. So there was a reason why China could make such low cost solar panels for solar. Okay, so let's move into microchip. Microchip is like thin air. It's called the meta technology, is the beating heart of anything that turns on and off. Almost everything that has any way of turning on and off. Sometimes you don't even need to have turning on and off. Your bank cards don't even need to turn on and off because it has microchip in it, and there are other ways to use microchips. It doesn't even need on-off switches. So, what is often not understood is what goes into a microchip. So in 1980s, so this is the periodic table. If some of you forgot, just to remind you, a periodic table from chemistry. So all the elements that are there in the world, there are no more elements. In the universe, yeah. There will be a higher periodic numbers elements, but those are increasingly more and more rare. But that's kind of impossible to find. But theoretically, that's all we have. And there are rare earths, minerals, which are even harder to find. In 1980s, only those were used. So as a microchip, you probably know silicon is the most important thing that you have heard, but silicon is the bulk of a microchip. It gives the support to the microchip, but there are lots of other elements that goes into there. In 1990s, we already started using more, and in 2000, we have almost 80% of the periodic table been used for generating a microchip. I think it's even more now because this is still 20 years ago, and I didn't get a newer plot. I have to find out that. And it's very difficult to extract them, as this is a carbon emission for each of them done in some weird fashion. I don't understand this graph very well. I have to try to find out. But all of these require very carbon or very toxic extraction, because a rare earth mineral means it's not rare in the world. Rare earth is not rare. It's getting them out is very difficult. You have to excavate a huge amount of earth and leach away most of them to get a tiny amount of rare earth. And that leaching requires toxic chemicals, very, very toxic chemicals. And that toxic chemical remains. And so enormous amount of ultra clean water and energy are required for any microchip production. And on top of it, there is something that you probably, I don't know whether you heard of it, it's called PFA, forever chemical. That is a kind of artificial chemical that is necessary to make microchips. And that chemical doesn't go away at all. And Europe just cannot let anyone use PFAs. So the cost of PFA-related disease in EU could cost 80 billion per year. That is Financial Times reporting in last year. If we make a silicon foundry in Europe, but silicon foundries are already there in South Asia, lots of them. So you can assume what is the cost there, which is unaccounted for. This is all the externalized cost of microchips. Rare earths are these magic elements that goes into microchips, and everything else that we are interested these days is mostly found in China, and their demands are increasing day by day. Even if you can find them anywhere else, China more or less have dominated the market to process them. And the processing is the most important thing, because you get a huge amount of iron ores, and then you have to leach out most of the ore to get a tiny amount of rare earth. And that has created huge pollution in various parts in China. And as China being an internal colonizer of its own, never lets you know this information. Who is affected by this? So, and it's very difficult to understand what's happening. A mine is profitable if you have 1 gram of element from 1 ton of material, and that's for gold. 1 gram from 1 ton, yeah. 100 kilogram, if you can get 1 ton, it's already commercially viable. Rare earths you have to measure, it's not only in 1 gram, it's parts per million. For rare earths, it goes down to parts per million. If you have like 1 millionth of, if you excavate 1 millionth ton, and if you get 1 part out of it, which is say 1 gram out of it, then rare earths can still be commercially viable. That's how important they are, and that's what keeps the industry going. But what are we using microchips for these days? And you all know about the big the AI hype all around, and AI is one of the biggest consumer of AI systems are one of the biggest consumers of microchip. So better and better AI that already kind of fascinates us in every way has 3 basic aspects. One is you can make better algorithms, you can create larger data set, or you can just put more and more chips, more and more powerful chips. For last almost 30 years, there has rarely been a better algorithm. Algorithms are not changing anymore. People are not making better algorithms. They are just putting more and more chips to make more AI more stronger. So all the ChatGPT and everything that you see is just because there are more chips inside. So more and more chips are making what we call this is what we call compute, the floating point operation. This is a technical term in computer science to describe how powerful your chips are. So that is becoming, that has grown enormously just because you can put more and more chips in it. It's not because of better algorithm. And that also requires a huge amount of training data. So the training data has to come from capturing all of our data in some form or other. And those are also required from sensors, and microchips are necessary for getting those training data as well from all your cameras and everything. We don't actually know how many chips are produced in any technology and how they are growing. It's very difficult to find out. But they are in so many different things that I was just trying to find out how many chips or how many how much electronics go into toys these days. So it seems the average American parent spends $700 per child per year on toys, and these are smart toys. Yeah, all of these are smart toys. No one buys non-smart toys in the US anymore. So smart toys has to speak to you or do, at least it will have an on-off button. And these are full of microchips. Not only one, maybe 5 microchips in each of them. And they will be thrown away next year. So this is what is a year-on-year growth of microchip. And this is, it shows the, it is so slow. Microchips are not only built more, they become more and more advanced. So this is the most advanced microchip that I'm showing here in orange. That is what is there in your latest iPhone and Android phones. But it doesn't mean that the older microchips are not used. That's the funny thing. So here you have this on top of orange, there is the blue one, then pink one, and this brown ones. So all these different microchip generations or the different kind of microchips, they go past almost 30, 40 years. So maybe the very top one was first the kind of microchip, the particular kind of microchip that was developed goes back to 1985, but they are still being sold almost in equal volume. So people find out more and more uses of chips. It's not that they stop the old ones and they create the new ones. New ones are created in more and more volumes, and old ones are also being sold in equal volumes. So new applications are found and new ways of using microchips keep on happening. And the energy consumption on each of these new microchips are just growing every year because it's not easy to make those new microchips. So, so everything that you create these days are so much energy and water consuming that the industry just don't know what to do. They couldn't figure out, the microchip industry couldn't figure out any way to come to any sort of net zero. They have almost given up that we cannot do net zero. So forget about it. These are not even out there. So the very top ones are not even there. They're all future. So that's the idea of this industry. So you always project in the future and try to say what will be created in future. So, but these are also produced mostly in a particular part of the world. So as you see, most of the microchips are produced in South Korea and China and Taiwan. So, and that's surprising why it happened there. First of all, it started happening there because of cheap labor. So it's moved from Silicon Valley in 1980s or 1970s even, because to get cheaper and cheaper labor in South Asia, labor that was also can be well governed by their whatever brutal regimes were there at that time. So labor would not go into any kind of unionization or anything. So that was the idea why Silicon Valley tried to move to Taiwan and China and South Korea, and at that point in other places. But Taiwan has somehow became the dominant player because of the lax environmental rules and so on over there, and also in other places. So Taiwan produces the most high quality chips these days, most high-end chips, and it's mostly coal-fired, as we were discussing the other day. Taiwan doesn't use any almost no renewable energy. So and the amount of water necessary in Taiwan for producing microchip has almost created a problem for the farmers in that in Taiwan. It just uses up a lot from everyone else's requirement. But the EU and US until now, they were just happy getting chips from everywhere else. But suddenly for last 3 years, because of geopolitical climate, they have started an unprecedented investment in chips. So over $350 billion has been invested in last 3 years in US and EU because of the CHIPS Act. You've probably heard of that, Science and Chips Act in the US and just CHIPS Act in EU. And what will happen is this will just create more and more microchips, right? I mean, Taiwan is not going to stop producing, neither Japan or China definitely is not going to stop. So this will just create hugely more microchips in the world. And if more are produced, more will be used. So there will be more applications being created just because more has been, I have mentioned before, this is a supply side problem. These are being produced, and this will be recouped by creating more demand all around the world.
Lower prices.
In lower prices, yes. But creating all of this is not cheap. Just a foundry costs 10 to 15 billion, and that's very interesting. I'm working with someone in another university. One of the key point is these are public funded money, all of these. But eventually, all of this company, what they do, they buy back share. So Intel has been hugely publicly funded for making microchip, and Apple as well. But they buy back share, and then what happens? Public money goes back to private money very easily. The share buyback is a big thing in technology companies these days. And this weird cycle. You get this money from public and you buy back share and make your company even bigger. But I'm not going into that details here. Chips are very complicated bits, but chips are not only the only thing that's there. Of course, it doesn't remain in vacuum. So there are non-chip components along with chips. You don't see a chip out here, right? The chips are inside here, inside toys, inside something. So it's encompassed with other non-chip components, and those are the optical component, the sensors, and discrete components, and so on, and finally plastic and so on to encapsulate everything. So these are have their own consumption. Just consider the 5G, the chips required for 5G. So we all know there is a huge amount of research that went into and money went into creating 5G technology. Microchips were the beating heart of it. But to establish 5G technology, just in the US, you need 600 million base stations. Because 5G doesn't go too far. Yeah. For the 600 million base station, you will need 300 million tons of gallium, and the world has only 1 million ton of gallium. So that's it. And most of it is controlled by China. Probably people will try to come up with other things, but it will also have its own restriction and so on. So, and even extracting that 1 million ton is not easy. And on top of it, there is called, yeah, I'll wrap up. So let's see where we are. Okay, let's forget about this. The techno solutionism is a kind of neo-colonialism for me, and that's what I try to touch, tie things together, because this enormous progress, or what you call progress in microchip and ICT technology, created a narrative in the world that technology can do anything. Yeah, this is not what we accept, of course, but a lot of left liberal economists and everyone else will probably buy that. But what I am interested in is what is happening to the world right now. And right now is techno-optimism, techno-solutionism is a future concept. What can technology solve in future? But what is happening in the world right now is something that should bother us, because that cannot be solved by future changes. And if you just see what climate change created in terms of heat, just heat, I mean, forget about any other thing. The world has changed enormously among what we call the heat-related deaths that's happening in the global south. If you don't know about wet bulb temperature, just the temperature at which people just cannot live. Yeah, it's unbearable. 30 degrees centigrade wet bulb temperature is unbearable temperature. And the number of people who will already live in that temperature in 2070 is this is all of these people, but it doesn't mean that all of this it's not happening right now. Wet bulb temperature of 30 degrees centigrade is very common to reach in South Asian countries these days. And if you are in one of those places, it's very difficult to just survive. Just do your everyday job. And that is what is happening now. So that cannot be solved by a solutionism that comes in 10 years from now. That has to be solved right now. And that's the kind of neo-colonialism I talk about, because there are other examples that can be brought, that what happens right now is already a form of colonialism, and not only from material extraction, but impacts of climate change. Okay, I'll skip all the Jevons paradox and rebound effect, because you know all of this. So I try to understand what technology has done in the last 20 years in the Western world. What good has it done in the Western world? I looked into poverty data. Poverty data didn't change at all in the last 20 years in the Western world. Poverty in UK is still 20% all throughout 2020s, 2010s, and 1990s and 2010. So there is no change of this. There is no change of poverty in all of Western Europe. So whose progress was this 20 years of technology or even 30 years of technology? I put that because that's where I came to Europe and it looked like a perfectly good part to live. Or what is the need for more technology then? But technology kept on happening. And what did it change to the world? I don't know. I mean, nothing has changed in terms of people who should have had a better life. Of course, that's Western Europe, but if you talk about the world, people will show this kind of data that poverty in the world has decreased. But that's $1.9 per day. $1.9 per day is nothing. Can you imagine what you can do in $1.9 per day? So $1.9 per day gives you, I mean, this is a graph that shows if you have $5 per day, so $5 per day for a family of four will give you not even $600 a month. This is PPP dollar, by the way. This is the same. This dollar is the same as in India, as in Indonesia or Bangladesh, as here. So the amount of thing you can buy in this $5 per day is nothing. And that hasn't. If you exclude China, nothing has changed. The number of people actually increased. This is the curve which I'm pointing out. This is the one excluding China, because China statistics is very unreliable in many sense. Excluding China, people, not even the percentage of people or the absolute number of people didn't change at all. The same here. I mean, I don't know why now people are starting to point $6.85 as a number, but $6.85 will give you $822 for a family of four for food, shelter, healthcare, education at the end of your month. What can you do anything with that? Anywhere. So it has never helped anyone much. Okay. So Mario, I'll stop here because I don't want to push people more on things. Yeah.
So you want to stop here?
This was
How many slides you have? 15? 60?
Oh,
Yeah, maybe the last
What are
one.
your thoughts on the last bit?
Yeah,
which one?
degrowth.
Degrowth bit,
Degrowth.
the last.
Yeah. Yeah, so Degrowth Scholar didn't engage with ICT innovation for all this while. So what is
Something.
some did, yeah, some did, but that we have to increase that. Who did, right? And there is, of course, this. When I talk about microchips and so on, which is the beating heart of ICT, I feel that that's new information to many of you as well. So that has to be brought into this. So any form of degrowth will require a limit of what ICT research is done around the world. But you were saying the other day that we cannot provide boundaries to people's creativity. We shouldn't. But that's not true, because this has been done in other parts of knowledge production. I always give this example of neuroscience because I'm very well connected to neuroscience. Neuroscience is a field of understanding the human brain, right? There's a huge amount of very, very smart people working in it. And they cannot do what they want to do in most cases. They are restricted in what experiments and ethics body in their university, in the national ethics body, will let them do. Because you might want to put an electrode in your friend's brain, but then no one will allow you to do that, right? There is a very specific requirement, and neuroscience is one of this very fast developing field with a lot of very smart people, and they manage to restrict themselves. So, but there are no ethics bodies like this in technology fields. That I can do any research I want to enhance my microchip research. No one stops me, and probably possible. So, yeah. Yeah.
No, because I'm like, because.
Okay, let's open the discussion.
I again would not agree with this, because the colonialism that you mentioned also happens in all these fields. I know about, especially about producing stem cell therapy. There are strict regulations here, but there are so many clinics in India that experiment with stem cells. So this example I would not agree with. Because like the different kinds of colonialism that are happening, this applies also to all the fields that are there. So maybe they are not able to do these things here, but there are, especially with companies who are working on these things, they have their resources set up in other countries where they really inhuman experiments on humans as well as everybody else.
No, I kind of agree, but if you set up at least a restriction, something, because there is no restriction at all. There's no restriction to how much more, how fast can you make your microchip? How much more data? To those, no one even thought of a restriction. What you are saying is there are restrictions and people try to avoid that. That will always be. It will always be there. What I'm saying is the restriction, no one even thought about restriction in certain fields, and those restrictions are becoming more and more important, I would say. So of course, people will try to avoid restriction in some way.
Also regulation.
But also the question of degrowth, I mean, let's not just keep sticking to some terms. There have been research that talks about alternatives to economic growth in relation to technology going on forever. So just because we've come up with a term does not mean that work has not been done around this. Like, for example, for the past 15 years, my understanding of engaging with technology always comes, and I was just reading this morning an article by a famous historian, Ramana Thapar, where she was talking about the 60s and how economic growth became such a big deal and everything else was starting to be neglected, and they were criticizing these things since then. So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I think that's one of the points that we miss in the growth community is that we're discussing all the time. The fact that the growth community are mostly made by ecological economists or even political ecologists that don't have, maybe less in political ecology, don't have like a clear understanding of how technology emerged. I think that technology is neutral and can be easily governed and easily replaced. Oh, look at what Jason people say in terms of the bicycles. No, that the bicycle is simpler than cars. So let's move everything, all the transportation with the bicycle, and we will fix the problems. I think this is something that, and the ICT, there being a lot of people are saying that the ICT is actually enabling the growth because we can do more stuff online, and all this idea of cosmolocalism, peer-based, common-based pre-production. That's something that's super problematic, no? Because we are excluding the materialities and also the colonial aspect.
There is an idea that ICT is a force for good.
Yeah.
There is an idea that
I was shocked by the fact that all the Facebook mediation and moderation is done by some people in Germany doing this, and they have problems.
There are already they try to create it in some parts in Western world, but it is always a problem. I mean, they often had to, and there were as the Ireland example I gave was because the litigation they had, because Facebook was not giving them PTSD support, so there was a huge amount of fine they had to put in. They shut it down finally.
Yeah. Okay. Questions? Everybody looking at Sophia because Sophia
Thank you very much. It's nice to hear some history. I suppose my question is, so what, in the sense of what what's your view on like the reuse of technology, how we can maybe use it in different ways, given this picture of, neo-colonial power dynamics? And what were your thoughts on Mario's paper on the internet and like the future of the internet? And do you have, what might degrowth technology be?
That's what I'm trying to find out. So I don't know what a degrowth technology would be. That's what I came to Mario. What would be a degrowth of technology? Because yeah, it's hard to say. I honestly don't know. I don't know what a degrowth technology would be because it's so pervasive and so particularly the kind of technology I'm talking about. It's everywhere. So how would you? What I'm probably at least proposing is a restriction on innovation of this kind of technology. I mean, one is the degrowth of or say limitation of the use, that's a different thing. But limitation of innovation is even more important, because if you keep on innovating, you'll keep on using.
But is an innovation for you, you know, do you see innovation as something that could mean something different? In that, if you keep on innovating, sure, but innovation as it stands now, right? Whereas you could have innovation in restriction, or, you know, in using the technology in a different way could be an innovation.
Well, ICT technology is very weird innovation. It's just, this is the only sector in the world which has a roadmap. No one says we need a building. Buildings should be 10% taller next year, or bridges should be 20%, or cars should be 30% faster next year. But ICT, or microchip innovation has a clear roadmap. It has to be 10% faster. It has to be 20% faster next year. So that's Moore's law. If you know Moore's law, or if you heard of Moore's law, this is a track that the industry will invest into generations and generations of this in future, because they have already decided that that's what they will do. Who knows why? Because that is very particular to this industry. No other industry has a roadmap for what will have, and once they have invested, they will have to.
I don't know, I'm sorry to contest, but urban planning does. It's like 2050, 70% of us will live in cities. Okay. So how, and then they go, okay, well, what we're going to build then to accommodate for that? Like urban planning has this very long time scale, so I think.
Oh, no. It's very different. I'm sorry, this is very different. There is no single planning industry all around the world. Some cities will plan this way. Some countries will plan that way. This is a technology. There is a body all around. It's called ITRS that defines this, and everyone will accept that.
So it's centralized.
It's a centralized body. There is no single planning committee for all the cities in the world, but ITRS is one single body.
So we need to go and conquer this.
No,
Occupy this.
yeah, but they are also not. I call it a single body, but this very rich technology firms were part of this body. So it's they're kind of together forming it. It's not a political body. It's a body of big.
Yes, I know. It's a consortium.
It's a consortium of firms, and they decide that in next year there will be 30% faster chip. The year next there will be again 30%.
Is it similar to the projection of the World Bank or the OECD? So it's, for me, it's a reflection. Is the technological reflection of or an ideology, which is the ideology of growth. Like if you look at the OECD, they say, okay, if you want to maintain our status, or
somehow, yes, but it doesn't happen all the time, right? It doesn't happen, but this is the only one that happens.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a plan for growth. There's a plan for this.
This is the incarnation of the spirit of capitalism and growth.
This is the true incarnation, the only realistic. Was one plot here that I didn't show. The only time something grew this first was explosives. So megatons of joules of explosives that human beings could create.
The nuclear bombs.
Yes. Before that, hydrogen and nuclear bomb and so on. So
it's escalating.
I mean, but we stopped that. But Moore's law is not stopping. It's just going on. Yeah. So there will be $1 trillion.
Do you have any data about how these microchips have been used by sectors, for example? Because it's not the same to put, I don't know, like I don't see the same value in microchips to improve like these toys or video games or mobile phones as it is to improve, for example, medical devices.
Yeah, it is there. I mean, I'm trying to get those. Yeah, but medical devices, that's also another trick here. Medical devices go into more like healthcare, like personal healthcare rather than hospital-based devices, because hospital-based devices it goes into smart watches and your smart this and that. Is that a good use? I don't know. I mean, that's probably not a good use at all. That's probably creating more data, and that data has to be processed, and more microchips are necessary for that. The whole idea of what this personalized medical gadgets, it's a purely it's fundamentally against what is it?
But when you were talking, for example, about AI, and AI is also developing like medical applications, like for example, helping doctors to identify like tumors or doing stuff like that.
Yes,
So
I see
not
that.
all uses are. I suppose like my point is like,
Exactly.
it's not like a big blanket like
Yeah.
you can throw at all the uses of microchips, like, because they're not all the same.
Yes, there are. I mean, people always will say there are few good users, but those are much, much smaller. You can see, I mean, there are way more. Yeah, there are way more other users that are much less. And again, I would say, I mean, I checked. There was this huge thing in the sonographers in the US that AI will reduce. There won't be any sonographers in the US because AI will take over. The number of sonographers and number of AI deployed both have increased because again they have to be checked. The data of the AI sonographer has to be checked by a real sonographer after a while and so on. So yeah, I don't think any of those will reduce the need for microchip at all. It will just increase, and it has a cost. Okay, let's say it does good. But what is the cost of doing that good?
No, I'm not saying that's good, but my point is that with restriction, like restriction alone is not a solution. Because if you restrict the production of microchips and then you allocate all the budget for useless stuff.
Okay, yeah, that's
Like,
useless stuff.
calling for restriction alone is a little bit like saying,
Yeah,
I don't know what.
you know what I mean?
I think this is really at the core of what degrowth is saying recently. So the democratic scale down of economic activity to a level that is compatible with ecosystems. So this is the definition of the most recent definition of our friends in Barcelona. For me, coming from STS in responsible innovation, this is a typical governance of innovation, governance of technology. Governance of innovation means how we use technology to reach certain goals. Okay, and this has been done traditionally, especially after the Second World War, in many cases. Nuclear power, genetically modified organism, biotechnology. And I agree with you that there is no reflection on this kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
I think it's a governance issue.
It's a governance issue that includes restriction, can include moratorium, can include limitation, but above all includes planning. So it's about, okay, how we do it now, we have certain needs, okay? So how we address these needs by using minimum resources and how many chips we need to produce. This has been done in the past. The Soviet Union, it's certainly in other places and historical moments. The Soviet Union's worked like that. I'm not saying that we need a lot of that one, but Chile tried to do that in a very modern way using ICT planning. There was experiments with Allende governments using planning, using softwares to do, okay, how much complex we need to produce this year, for what reason. And this is and then there is the final step, which is how we do it democratically.
Yeah, because what I wanted to say before is what you're saying. If you only restrict, but you don't ask the question of how these things are allocated, what you can create is more scarcity.
Yeah.
For people who actually need it, so I think.
This is planning.
Yeah, no, understand.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Restriction shouldn't be the only thing.
Restriction is good, but it's only.
Control stagnation.
Like if you restrict it, but then this is allocated only like by, based on demand.
I'm not proposing I don't think a restriction is not what I have in mind. What I'm saying is restriction of innovation. Microchip innovation. I mean, with today's microchips, you can do a lot. You can do a huge lot that all of humanity will need.
Okay.
It's the innovation part.
Let me be more provocative before giving the word to Javier.
To be more.
Is innovation the problem, or is the amount of chips that we produce? Because for me, we can definitely reduce the production of microchips and increasing innovation in microchips. So we can produce a minimum, a fraction of the microchip that we are producing now, but much better.
No, you cannot. Better is the innovative part. You
Yeah.
cannot, I mean, we have pretty
So,
good microchips.
For me, my provocation is that this can be disentangled. That you can still have innovation, but producing less and less and less microchips. Because otherwise, you monopolize.
I think like we are missing the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Yeah, because like,
Capitalism.
not, yeah, capitalism, but like we started with the idea of decolonialism. And now we are talking about governance or scaling down or degrowth, but that is not an alternative to decolonialism. We talked about two things in the first half, like we talked about knowledge appropriation by scientists sitting in the European countries and resource extraction. In the second part, you saw mostly resource extraction. And you didn't talk about, at least in theory, knowledge reappropriation. And then the debate shifted on innovation. But it's mostly about like resource extraction, and it is about like what is fueling the economic growth or the capitalist growth. But how does like question of scale or planning fit into all this debate? Like, because the whole debate has changed. Now we are not in a traditional capitalism, like where few companies were very big, but still they were under the control of the colonial empire. East India Company. How East India Company was took over by the British Empire. Same is with like Dutch East India Company, like how the states were more powerful than the companies themselves. But now we are in an era like where states are becoming less powerful and certain big monopolistic companies are becoming more powerful than the state itself. And this is being recognized not only by like degrowth, but a year back, I listened to a talk by one of the right-wing ideologue in India, and he was talking about the same question, scale jumping. Like he was talking about the Modi government, that the Modi government has no clue and no control over Twitter or Facebook, and how Twitter and Facebook, with the kind of control they have over the people, they can change many things. And the Indian state, like which is assumed as very mighty, is struggling to deal with that. The same is true for US. Trump like his account has been like banned on Twitter. So the right wing is also talking about the growth of like this kind of big companies. The centrists, like who are the market guys, like Raghuram Rajan, he is also talking about like how to overcome this kind of capitalism and think about a more humane capitalism. So the debate again goes back to like the question of decolonialism. How we are talking about decolonialism, because we are still only talking about resource extraction in a more advanced manner. But what is the critique to that, like shifting of like extraction from other part to the developed world, or the financialization of this whole thing, like which is leading to more power to these companies in terms of share buyback and all these things. So in terms of like decolonialism, like what we can deduce from all of this. And
No, I don't have an answer. I'm just showing the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, just to add on to that a little bit, even though I can't completely, but I mean, one thing that also struck me is, the company that makes the machines to make the microchips is one company in the Netherlands, right? Which is like following one type of innovation, one type of how microchips should be, etc. And is very much part of like geopolitics, where they're not allowed to sell certain machines to China, but only to Taiwan, which is why so much is still produced in Taiwan. So just
Yeah, there are very specific places European governments can actually tighten the knot, tighten the bolts and so on, because a lot of things still happen in Europe, even if the production is in South Asia. A lot of things do happen in Europe. Yeah. I'm highlighting the problems. I don't have solutions. Yes.
Sure.
I was wondering, coming a little bit back again to the innovation debate, how, like, isn't it also a question how innovation is defined by this? Because apparently it's already pretty much defined according to this graph and the plumbing and whatever. Isn't it then also, if we maybe reflect on the knowledge production and ask how to define innovation? For example, if we look at the periodic table and the elements used, would it not be also a kind of other innovation if we use less?
Yeah, I actually had that kind of innovation with the restriction has to be put in that way. So maybe like the example of neuroscience that I gave, neuroscientists would still want to get the same data, but come up with a different way. I mean, to understand find out memory. I mean, easiest way would be take a lot of monkeys and put a lot of electrodes in their hippocampus and get data, but they're not allowed to do that. So they'll come up with alternative ways. So maybe an innovation could be used less mineral at all. And I don't know whether that is even possible anymore, but yeah, those kind of innovation, you're right. Yeah, those kind of innovations are probably has to be emphasized in some way.
Okay. Well, Srinjoy will be around today, maybe
Yeah,
tomorrow.
today for sure. Yeah, tomorrow I'll see how long. Yeah.
And yeah, I think it was a great presentation. You will probably come to the conference, and we are collaborating. So feel free to ask more questions or get in touch with him. And thank you very much for visiting.
Thank you. Thank you.